You graduated on a Saturday in May. Gown, photos, the whole thing. Your parents drove 4 hours. Someone took a picture of you holding the diploma and you posted it, and it got more likes than anything you'd ever posted before. By Monday morning, you had $67,000 in federal student loans at 6.5% interest, and the job offer for $38,000 a year that you accepted because 3 other applications hadn't responded at all. You did the math on the drive home. You didn't say it out loud, you just sat in the passenger seat watching the highway and running the numbers in your head, and at some point you stopped running them because the direction they were going didn't feel like something you could look at directly yet. Here's what nobody told you about that diploma. The institution that gave it to you accepted zero financial risk in the transaction. They received full payment, your full tuition, every semester, guaranteed by federal loans that disperse regardless of whether the education produced income. If you thrived, great. If you spent the next decade underwater on debt for a degree that never paid what the brochure implied, also great for them. The risk was yours, the asset was theirs, the liability was yours, the ranking, the endowment, the campus expansion completed in your junior year, theirs. You are living inside a financial structure that the people of France in 1788 would have recognized immediately. Not the guillotines, not the speeches, not the storming of anything, the economic structure underneath all of that, the one that made everything else inevitable. Let's go there, because the parallel is not metaphorical, it is mechanical. France in 1788 was operating under a tax system called the Ancien Regime. The country was functionally bankrupt. Decades of wars, including funding the American Revolution, had destroyed the royal treasury. The debt was crushing. The solution the crown reached for every single time was the same one. Make the people who had nothing pay for the problems created by the people who had everything. The French population was divided into 3 estates. The first estate, the clergy, owned roughly 10% of all French land and paid essentially zero taxes. The second estate, the nobility, owned another 25% and paid almost nothing. The third estate, everyone else, roughly 97% of the population, owned the remaining land, generated nearly all of the country's economic activity, and paid virtually all of the taxes. Not because of some ancient and unchangeable law of nature, because the people designing the system were the people benefiting from it, and they had done so for long enough that it had started to feel like weather, like something that simply was rather than something that had been deliberately constructed. Now, pause there. The total outstanding federal student loan debt in the United States right now is $1.84 trillion across 42.8 million borrowers. The average federal balance is $39,547, and the institutions that issued the credentials those loans were used to purchase, the universities, the graduate schools, the professional programs, are sitting on a combined endowment of roughly $839 billion. Harvard alone holds $51 billion, Yale $41 billion. These institutions pay no federal income tax on their endowment investment returns. They are classified as nonprofits. The student who borrowed $67,000 to attend is paying 6.5% interest on that balance. The institution that collected the $67,000 in tuition paid nothing if the education didn't produce the income it implied it would. The risk moved in one direction. The money moved in the other. The people designing this system are, once again, the people benefiting from it. The third estate is still doing all the pain. Here's what the French peasant of 1788 and the 2025 graduate have in common that gets almost no attention. Neither of them made a stupid decision. The French peasant paid the tile, the land tax, because refusing to pay meant losing the land, which meant starvation. The 2025 graduate took the federal loan because every authority figure in their life, every guidance counselor, every college prepped industry, every parent who remembered a different economy told them that the credential was the entry point, that without it, the door didn't open, that the debt was an investment with a reliable return. Both of them were told the rules of the game by the people who wrote the rules of the game. Neither of them was lying when they agreed to play. But here's what the Third Estate figured out in 1789 that changed everything. The problem was not that they had made bad individual decisions. The problem was the architecture, the structure, the way the system had been engineered to extract from the bottom and accumulate at the top so efficiently for so long that extraction started to feel like the natural order of things. The moment they named it as a system rather than as weather was the moment the Bastille became possible. You are allowed to name it. The student loan system in the United States was not designed to produce educated citizens. It was designed to produce debtors. The evidence is in the structure. Income-driven repayment plans that can stretch to 25 years, during which interest accrues on the principal, meaning a borrower can make payments faithfully for a decade and owe more than they started with. Interest rates set by Congress, not by the market. No discharge in bankruptcy, the one legal protection available to every other category of debt, from gambling losses to failed business ventures, categorically unavailable for student loans. And the institutions collecting the tuition fully insulated from the outcome, their revenue guaranteed regardless of whether the credential produced what the student was told it would. Turgot, the French finance minister, tried to warn Louis XVI in 1776. He wrote that the tax system was unjust, that it was unsustainable, that the burden on the Third Estate would eventually produce a reckoning. Louis dismissed him. The system had been producing acceptable results for the people running it for long enough that the warning registered as alarmism rather than arithmetic. The arithmetic always wins eventually. Here is what the arithmetic says now. A borrower at $39,547 with a 6.5% interest rate on a standard 10-year repayment plan pays approximately $449 per month. Over 10 years, they pay back roughly $53,880, $14,333 more than they borrowed. That $14,333 is not the cost of an education. It is the cost of having needed money before you had it, in a system that charges you for that condition for a decade. Meanwhile, the university that collected the original $39,547 invested its endowment, which is to say its accumulated prior tuition, and earned, if it was Harvard, approximately 11% on those funds last fiscal year. The institution's money compounded. The graduate's debt compounded in opposite directions. The gap between those two trajectories is not an accident. It is the product. The French nobility didn't hate the peasants. They simply never had a reason to think seriously about their situation. The system delivered what the nobility needed and asked nothing of them in return. The cognitive effort required to examine that system critically was effort the system itself never demanded. When Marie Antoinette allegedly said to let them eat cake, she was not being cruel in the way a deliberate villain is cruel. She was being oblivious in the way that only total insulation from consequence makes possible. The endowment committee that approved the 23rd consecutive year of tuition increases above the rate of inflation is not mustache twirling. They're just responding to incentives that reward the decision and absorb none of the cost. That's what makes it a system. That's what makes it durable, and that's what makes it, historically, a particular kind of unstable. The French Revolution did not happen because the Third Estate suddenly became angry. They had been angry for a century. It happened because three things converged. The debt became impossible to manage. The institutions designed to absorb the pressure of that impossibility stopped functioning, and a generation that had been educated just enough to name what was happening ran out of reasons to stay quiet. The U.S. student loan system now has 42 million people who can name exactly what happened to them, who know the interest rate, who have done the math on the 25-year repayment timeline, who applied the credential to the job market and found the return on investment substantially below what the brochure described, who have been told consistently by the people who designed the system that the problem is their spending habits, their avocado toast, their failure to negotiate, their choice of major. The problem is not the major. The problem is the architecture. Here is what actually changes when you understand this. You stop apologizing for the debt. Not because it isn't real and not because the payment isn't due, but because shame is the mechanism by which systems maintain themselves past the point of justification. The debtor who believes the debt is their personal moral failure pays quietly. The debtor who understands the structural conditions that produce the debt starts asking different questions about income-driven repayment, about public service loan forgiveness and its actual qualification requirements, about employer repayment assistance, which 8% of companies now offer and almost no employee asks about refinancing windows when rates shift, about the political organizations, and there are several, whose entire function is the structural question, not the individual one. The Third Estate didn't escape the ancien regime by becoming better peasants. They escaped it by refusing the framing that made their condition feel like a personal failing rather than a political choice. Your diploma is real. The skills are real. The debt is also real, and it is the product of a system that collected full payment, bore zero risk, and will continue operating exactly as designed until enough people stop treating the arithmetic as weather. It is not weather. It was built by people with specific interests in a specific direction. The Bastille fell on a Tuesday. The people who stormed it had been doing the math for years.